welcome to the Joyful House, and thank you for joining me for this segment of Once Upon a Storybook. Today we are continuing the Anne of Green Gables series with book number 5, Anne's House of Dreams, and today we're actually going to look at 3 chapters instead of our normal 2 because they're a little on the short side. So today we're going to look at chapter 31, The Truth Makes Free. Chapter 32, Miss Cornelia discusses the affair. And chapter 33, Leslie returns. So if you're ready, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy this storybook adventure. Chapter 31, The Truth Makes Free. Leslie, having once made her mind up on what to do, proceeded to do it with characteristic resolution and speed. House cleaning must be finished with first, whatever issues of life and death might await beyond. The gray house up the brook was put into flawless order and cleanliness with Miss Cornelia's readily assistance. Miss Cornelia, having said her say to Anne, and later on to Gilbert and Captain Jim, sparing neither of them, let it be assured, never spoke of the matter to Leslie. She accepted the fact of Dick's operation, referred to it when necessary in a businesslike way, and ignored it when it was not. Leslie never attempted to discuss it. She was very cold and quiet during these beautiful spring days. She seldom visited Anne, and though she was invariably courteous and friendly, that very courtesy was an icy barrier between her and the people of the little house. The old jokes and laughter and chumminess of common things could not reach over it. Anne refused to feel hurt. She knew that Leslie was in the grips of a hideous dread, a dread that wrapped her away from all little glimpses of happiness and hours of pleasure. When one great passion seizes possession of the soul and all other feelings are crowded aside. Never in all her life had Leslie Moore shuddered away from the future with more intolerable terror. But she went forward as unswervingly in the path she had elected as the martyrs of old walked their chosen ways, knowing the end of it to be the fiery agony of the stake. The financial question was settled with greater ease than Anne had feared. Leslie borrowed the necessary money from Captain Jim, and at her insistence, he took a mortgage on the little farm. So that is one thing off the poor girl's mind, Miss Cornelia told Anne. And off mine, too. Now, if Dick gets well enough to work again, he'll be able to earn enough to pay the interest on it. And if he doesn't, I know Captain Jim will manage some way that Leslie won't have to. He said as much to me. I'm getting old, Cornelia, he said, and I've no chick or child of my own. Leslie won't take a gift from a living man, but maybe she will from a dead one. So it will be all right as far as that goes. I wish everything else might be settled as satisfactorily. And as for that wretched of a Dick, he's been awful these last few days. The devil was in him. Believe me. Leslie and I couldn't get on with our work for the tricks he'd play. He chased all her ducks one day around the yard till most of them died, and not one thing would he do for us. Sometimes, you know, he'll make himself quite handy, bringing in pails of water and wood. But this week, if we sent him to the well, he'd try to climb down it. I thought once if you'd only shoot down there head first, everything would be nicely settled. Oh, Miss Cornelia! Now, you needed Miss Cornelia me, Anne dearie. Anybody would have thought the same. If the Montreal doctors can make a rational creature out of Dick Moore, they're wonders. Leslie took Dick to Montreal early in May. Gilbert went with her to help her and make the necessary arrangements for her. He came home with the report that the Montreal surgeon whom they had consulted agreed with him that there was a good chance of Dick's restoration. Very comforting, said Miss Cornelia sarcastically. Anne only sighed. Leslie had been very distant at their parting, but she promised to write, and 10 days after Gilbert's return the letter came. Leslie wrote that the operation had been successfully performed and that Dick was making a good recovery. "What does she mean by successfully?" asked Anne. "Does she mean that Dick's memory is really restored?" "Not likely, since she says nothing of it," says Gilbert. "She uses the word successfully from the surgeon's point of view. The operation has been performed and followed by normal results. But it is too soon to know whether Dick's faculties will even be eventually restored, wholly or in part. His memory would not be likely to return to him all at once. The process will be gradual, if it occurs at all." "Is that all she says?" "Yes, that's her letter. It's very short. Poor girl, she must be under a terrible strain. Gilbert Blythe, there are heaps of things I'd love to say to you, only it would be mean." Miss Cornelia says them for you," said Gilbert, with a rueful smile. "She combs me down every time I encounter her. She makes it plain to me that she regards me as a little better than a murderer, and that she thinks it's a great pity that Dr. Dave ever let me step into his shoes. She even told me that the Methodist doctor over the harbor was to be preferred before me. With Miss Cornelia, the force of condemnation can no further go." "If Cornelia Bryant were sick, it would not be Dr. Dave or the Methodist doctor that she would send for," sniffled Susan. "She would have you out of your hard-earned bed in the middle of the night, doctor dear, if she took a spell of misery. That she would. And then she would likely say your bill was past all reason. But do not you mind her, doctor dear. It takes all kinds of people to make a world." No further word came from Leslie for some time. The May days crept away in a sweet succession, and the shores of Four Winds harbored green and bloomed and purpled. One day in late May, Gilbert came home to be met by Susan in the stable yard. "I'm afraid something has upset Mrs. Doctor dear," she said mysteriously. "She got a letter this afternoon, and since then she has just been walking around the garden and talking to herself. You know, it is not good for her to be on her feet so much, doctor dear. She did not see fit to tell me what her news was, and I am no pry doctor dear, and never was, but it is plain something has upset her, and it is not good for her to be upset." Gilbert hurried rather anxiously to the garden. Sorry, y'all. I have a strand of hair that was tickling my eye. Had anything happened at Green Gables? But Anne, sitting on the rustic seat by the brook, did not look troubled, though she was certainly much excited. Her eyes were their grayest and scarlet spots burned on her cheeks. "What has happened, Anne?" Anne gave a queer little laugh. "I think you'll hardly believe it when I tell you, Gilbert." "I can't believe it yet. As Susan said the other day, I felt like a fly come into life in the sun. Days like that. It is all so incredible. I read the letter a score of times, and every time it's just the same. I can't believe my own eyes." "Oh, Gilbert, you are right, so right. I can see that clearly enough now, and I'm so ashamed of myself. And will you really ever forgive me?" "Anne, I'll shake you if you don't grow coherent. Redmond would be ashamed of you. What has happened?" "You won't believe it. You won't believe it. I'm going in to phone for Uncle Dave," said Gilbert, pretending to start for the house. "Sit down, Gilbert. I'll try to tell you. I've had a letter, and oh, Gilbert, it is all so amazing. So incredibly amazing. We never thought, not one of us ever dreamed." "I suppose," said Gilbert, sitting down with a resigned air, "the only thing to do in a case of this is kind of have patience and go at the matter categorically. Whom is your letter from?" "Leslie. And oh, Gilbert." "Leslie? Whew! What does she have to say? What's the news about Dick?" Anne lifted the letter and held it out, calmly dramatic in a moment. "There is no Dick. The man we have thought Dick Moore, whom everybody in Four Winds has believed for 12 years to be Dick Moore, is his cousin, George Moore, of Nova Scotia, who, it seems, always remembered him very strikingly. Dick Moore died of yellow fever 13 years ago in Cuba." Chapter 32. Miss Cornelia discusses the affair. "And do you mean to tell me, Anne dearie, that Dick Moore has turned out to not be Dick Moore at all, but somebody else? Is that what you phoned up to me today? Yes, Miss Cornelia. It's amazing, isn't it? It's just like a man, said Miss Cornelia helplessly. She took off her hat with trembling fingers. For once in her life, Miss Cornelia was undeniably staggered. I can't seem to make sense of it, Anne, she said. I heard you say it, and I believe you, but I can't take it. Dick Moore is dead, has been dead all these years, and Leslie is free? Yes, the truth has made her free. Gilbert was right when he said that verse with the grandest in the Bible. Tell me everything, Anne dearie. Since I got your phone, I've been in regular muddle, believe me. Cornelia Bryant was never so kerflummoxed before. There isn't a great deal to tell. Leslie's letter was short. She didn't go into particulars. This man, George Moore, has recovered his memory and knows who he is. He says Dick took yellow fever in Cuba and the 4 sisters had to sail without him. George stayed behind to nurse him, but he died very shortly afterwards. George did not write Leslie because he intended to come home right away and tell her himself. And why didn't he? I suppose his accident must have intervened. Gilbert says it's quite likely that George Moore remembered nothing of his accident or what led to it, and may never remember it. It probably happened very soon after Dick's death. We may find out more particulars when Leslie writes again. Does she say what she's going to do? When is she coming home? She says she'll stay with George Moore until he can leave the hospital. She's written to his people in Nova Scotia, and it seems that George's only near relative is a married sister much older than himself. She was living when George sailed on the 4 sisters, but of course we do not know what may have happened since. Did you ever see George Moore, Miss Cornelia? I did. It's all coming back to me. He was here visiting his Uncle Abner 18 years ago when he and Dick would be about 17. They were double cousins, you see. Their fathers were brothers and their mothers were twin sisters, and they did look a terrible lot alike. Of course, added Miss Cornelia scornfully, it wasn't one of those freak resemblances you read of in novels where 2 people are so much alike that they can fill each other's places and their nearest and dearest can't tell between them. In those days, you could tell easily enough which was George and which was Dick, if you saw them together and near at hand. Apart or some distance away, it wasn't so easy. They played lots of tricks on people and thought it was great fun, the 2 scamps. George Moore was a little taller and a good deal fatter than Dick, though neither of them was about what you'd call fat. They were both of the lean kind. Dick had higher color than George, and his hair was a shade lighter. But their features were just alike, and they both had that queer freak of eyes, one blue and one hazel. They weren't much alike in any other way, though. George was a real nice fellow, though he was a scallywag for mischief, and some said he had a liking for a glass even then. But everybody liked him better than Dick. He spent about a month here. Leslie never saw him. She was only about 8 or 9 then, and I remember now that she spent that whole winter over harbor with her grandmother West. Captain Jim was away, too. There was the winter that he was wrecked on the Magdalens. I don't suppose either he or Leslie had ever heard about the Nova Scotia cousin looking so much like Dick. Nobody ever thought of him when Captain Jim brought George, home. Of course, we were all thought that Dick had changed considerably. He's got so lumpish and fat. But we put that down to what happened to him, and no doubt that was the reason, for, as I've said, George wasn't fat to begin with either. And there was no other way we could have guessed, for the man's senses were clean gone. I can't see that it's any wonder we were all deceived. But it is a staggering thing. And Leslie has sacrificed the best years of her life to nursing a man who hadn't any claim on her. Oh, drat the men. No matter what they do, it's the wrong thing. And no matter who they are, it's somebody they shouldn't be. They do aspirate me. Gilbert and Captain Jim are men, and it is through them that the truth has been discovered at last, said Anne. Well, I'll admit that, conceded Miss Cornelia reluctantly. I'm sorry I raked the doctor off so. It's the first time in my life I've ever felt ashamed of anything I said to a man. I don't know as I shall tell him so, though. He'll just have to take it for granted. Well, Ann dearie, it's a mercy the Lord doesn't answer all our prayers. I've been praying hard right along that the operation would cure Dick. Of course, I didn't put it just quite so plain. But what that was in the back of my mind, and I have no doubt that the Lord knew it. Well, He's answered the spirit of your prayer. You really wish that things shouldn't be made any harder for Leslie, and I'm afraid that in my secret heart I've been hoping the operation wouldn't succeed, and I am wholesomely ashamed of it. How does Leslie seem to take it? She writes like one dazed. I think, like ourselves, she hardly realizes it yet. She says it all seems like a strange dream to me, Anne. That is the only reference she makes to herself. Poor child, I suppose when the chains are struck off a prisoner, he'd feel queer and lost without them for a while. Anne dearie, there's a thought that keeps coming to mind. What about Owen Ford? We both know Leslie was fond of him. Did it ever occur to you that he was fond of her? It did once, admitted Anne, feeling that she might say so much. Well, I hadn't any reason to think he was, but it just appeared to me that he must be. Now, Anne dearie, the Lord knows I'm not much of a matchmaker, and I sworn all such doings, but if I were you and writing to that Ford man, I'd just mention casual like what has happened. That is what I'd do. Of course, I will mention it when I write him, said Anne, a trifle distantly. Somehow this was a thing she could not discuss with Miss Cornelia, and yet she had to admit that same thought had been lurking in her mind ever since she'd heard of Leslie's freedom. But she would not desecrate it by such free speech. Of course, there is no great rush, dearie, but Dick Moore has been dead for 13 years and Leslie has wasted enough of her life for him. We'll just see what comes of it. And for this George Moore, who's gone and come back to life when everyone thought he was dead and done for, just like a man. I'm real sorry for him. He won't seem to fit in anywhere. He's still a young man, and if he recovers completely, as seems likely, he'll be able to make a place for himself again. It must be very strange for him, poor fella. I suppose all these years since his accident will not exist for him. Chapter 33. Leslie returns. A fortnight later, Leslie Moore came home alone to the old house where she had spent so many bitter years. In the June twilight, she went over the fields to Anne's and appeared with ghost-like suddenness in the scented garden. "Leslie!" cried Anne in amazement. "Where have you sprung from? We never knew you were coming. Why didn't you write? We would have met you." "I couldn't write somehow, Anne. It seemed so futile to try to say anything with pen and ink, and I wanted to get back quietly and unobserved." Anne put her arms around Leslie and kissed her. Leslie returned the kiss warmly. She looked pale and tired, and she gave a little sigh as she dropped down on the grasses beside a great bed of daffodils that were gleaming through the pale, silvery twilight like golden stars. "And you've come home, Leslie." "Yes. George Moore's sister came to Montreal and took him home with her. Poor fella, he was sorry to part with me. Though I was a stranger to him when his memory first came back, he clung to me in those first hard days when he was trying to realize that Dick's death was not the thing of yesterday that it seemed to him. It was all very hard for him. I helped him all I could. When his sister came in, it was easier for him because he seemed to him only the other day that he had seen her last. Fortunately, she had not changed much, and that helped him too. It's all so strange and wonderful, Leslie. I think none of us realize it yet. I cannot. When I went into the house over there an hour ago, I felt that it must be a dream, that Dick might be there, with his childish smile as he'd been for so long. And I seem stunned yet. I'm not glad or sorry or anything. I feel as if something has been torn suddenly out of my life and left a terrible hole. I feel as if I couldn't be I, as if I might have changed into somebody else and couldn't get used to it. It gives me a horrible, lonely, dazed, helpless feeling. It's good to see you again. It seems as if you are sort of an anchor for my drifting soul. Oh, Anne, I dread it all. The gossip, the wonderment, and the questioning. When I think of that, I wish that I need not have come home at all. Dr. Dave was at the station when I came off the train. He brought me home. Poor old man, he feels very badly because he told me years ago that nothing could be done for Dick. I honestly thought so, Leslie, he said to me today, but I should have told you not to depend on my opinion. I should have told you to go to a specialist. If I have, you'd have been saved many bitter years, and poor George Moore, many wasted ones. I blame myself very much, Leslie. I told him not to do that. He had done what he thought was right. He has always been so kind to me. I couldn't bear to see him worrying over it. And George, is his memory fully restored? Practically, of course. There are many great details he can't recall yet, but he remembers more and more every day. He went out for a walk on the evening after Dick was buried. He had Dick's money and watch on him. He meant to bring them home to me along with my letter. He admits he went to a place where the sailors retorted, and he remembers drinking and nothing else. And I shall never forget the moment he remembered his own name. I saw him looking at me with an intelligent but puzzled expression. I said, "Do you know me, Dick?" And he answered, "I never saw you before. Who are you?" "And my name is not Dick. I'm George Moore, and Dick died of yellow fever yesterday. Where am I? What has happened to me? I fainted, Anne, and ever since I have felt as if I were in a dream." You will soon adjust yourself to this new state of things, Leslie. And you are young. Life is before you. You still have many wonderful, beautiful years left. Perhaps I'll be able to look at it in that way after a while, Anne. Just now I feel too tired and indifferent to think about the future. Anne, I'm lonely. I miss Dick. Isn't it all very strange? Do you know, I was really fond of poor George, I suppose I should say, just as I would have been fond of a helpless child who depended on me for everything. I would never admitted it. I was really ashamed of it because, you see, I hated and despised Dick so much before he went away. And when I heard that Captain Jim was bringing him home, I expected I would feel just the same to him. But I never did, although I did continue to loathe him as I remembered him before. But from the time he came home, I felt only a pity that hurt and wrung me. I suppose then it was just because his accident had made him so helpless and changed. But now I believe it was because there was really a different personality there. Carlo knew it, Anne. I now know that Carlo knew it. I always thought it strange that Carlo shouldn't have known Dick. Dogs are usually so faithful, but he knew it was not his master who would come back, and although none of the rest of us did. I've never seen George Moore, you know. I remember now that Dick once mentioned casually that he has a cousin in Nova Scotia who looked as much like him as if they were twins, but the thing had gone out of my memory, and in any case, I would have never thought of it having any importance. You see, it never occurred to me to question Dick's identity. Any change in him seemed to me just the result of the accident. Oh, Anne, that night in April when Gilbert told me he thought Dick might be cured, I can never forget it. It seemed to me that I had once been a prisoner in a hideous cage of torture, and then the door had been opened and I could get out. I was still chained to the cage, but I was not in it, and that night I felt that a merciless hand was drawing me back into the cage, back to a torture even more terrible than it had once been. I didn't blame Gilbert. I felt he was right, and he had been very good. He said that if, in view of the expense and uncertainty of the operation, I should decide not to risk it, he would not blame me in the least. But I knew how I ought to decide, and I couldn't face it. All night I walked the floor like a mad woman, trying to compel myself to face it. And I couldn't, Anne. I thought I couldn't. And when the morning broke, I set my teeth and resolved that I wouldn't. I would let things remain as they were. It was very wicked, I know. It would have been just punishment for such wickedness if I'd been left to abide by that decision. I kept to it all day. That afternoon I had to go up to the Glen to do some shopping. It was one of Dick's quiet, drowsy days, so I left him alone. I was gone a little longer than I expected, and he missed me. He felt lonely, and when I got home he ran to meet me just like a child, with such a pleased smile on his face. And somehow, Anne, I just gave way then. That smile on his poor vacant face was more than I could endure. I felt as if I were denying a child the chance to grow and develop. I knew that I must give him his chance, no matter what the consequences might be. So I came over and told Gilbert. Oh, Anne, you must thought me hateful in those weeks before I went away. I didn't mean to be, but I couldn't think of anything except what I had to do, and everything and everybody about me were like shadows. I know. I understood, Leslie, and now it's all over. Your chain is broken, and there is no cage. There is no cage, repeated Leslie absently, plucking at the fringing grasses with her slender brown hands. But it doesn't seem as if there were anything else, Anne. You remember what I told you of my folly that night on the sandbar? I find one doesn't give over being a fool very quickly. Sometimes I think there are people who are worth being fools over. And to be a fool of that kind is almost as bad as being a dog on a chain. You will feel very differently after you get over being tired and bewildered, said Anne, who, knowing a certain thing that Leslie did not know, did not feel herself called upon to waste over much sympathy. Leslie laid her splendid golden head against Anne's knee. Anyhow, I have you, she said. Life can't be altogether empty with such a friend, Anne. Pat my head just as if I were a little girl. Mother me a bit, and let me tell you, while my stubborn tongue is loose, a little just what you and your comradeship have meant to me since that night I met you on the rock shore. Wow. That concludes our storybook adventure for today. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit surprising to discover that Dick is not Dick and it is his cousin George. So excited to see how this storybook adventure unfolds for us. So if you are excited to learn more, then come back and join me next time. But until then, be joyful and be the joy in everything you do and live your joy. And I'll see you next time. Bye.